Would you pray with me? Creator God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Well, if you ever find yourself in Omaha, Nebraska, driving south on 132nd Street, just south of Highway 6, you will find a 38-acre oasis of land that is home to a very unique organization. This organization is known as the Tri-Faith Initiative. That's T-R-I, as in three. Tri-Faith Initiative, and its story is quite incredible. 16 years ago, people scoffed at the idea of this place and said it could not be done. But the founders of this ambitious project saw God calling them to work for peace in their South Omaha context. And so they began planning this immense project. The Tri-Faith Initiative brings together in permanent residency three wonderful expressions of faith: a Jewish synagogue, a Muslim mosque, and a United Church of Christ congregation, all centered on one 38-acre campus, independently owned, but partners in the Tri-Faith Initiative. They are three separate entities, but they are also three partners in ministry with intermingled congregations and intermingled mission work, intermingled projects and passions, and expressions of faith that are both autonomous and in relation with one another. It is an amazing example of the peace that is possible when we actually listen to God. Their mission statement reads, "Inspired by the faith of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities, we cultivate inclusive environments to advance interfaith relationship and understanding." Their vision statement calls for a world where differences are honored, similarities are built upon, and everyone belongs. The story of the Tri-Faith Initiative began quite simply with conversation. Conversation among interfaith partners. Temple Israel had outgrown their location on Cass Street in Omaha and were looking to partner with another agency. The leaders of Temple Israel began talking with leaders in the Muslim community about partnership possibilities. They realized their shared values and began dreaming about what it could look like if all the Abrahamic religions came together in one place: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity working together as children of Abraham. To that end, they began looking for a Christian church to partner with their ideals. Now, the Jewish and Muslim communities partnered with the Episcopal Church for a while, but eventually the United Church of Christ became their Christian partner. In 2006, land was purchased for this initiative, but the first structure wasn't built in 2013 when Temple Israel was constructed. In 2015, the American Muslim Institute opened on the campus, and in 2019, the United Church of Christ completed their building, and a previous historic congregation moved into the new building. On October 17, 2020, the final building on campus, the Tri-Faith Center, opened its doors with event space, educational facilities, and more. The campus was complete. Now, connecting these four buildings is an elevated track called Abraham's Circle Bridge, kind of like our circle here. It is like the elevated track at the Arc here in Columbia, but it is outdoor, and it is circular, not oval. It's the primary means of going from one building to another on campus. Abraham's Bridge serves as the catalyst for relationship building among these congregations. Groups from each of these faith organizations gather on the bridge. They have lunch on the bridge. They tell stories on the bridge. Members of all three congregations walk the bridge daily to talk to one another and build interfaith partnerships. Behind Temple Israel lies the Tri-Faith Garden and Orchard. In this area, young fruit trees are growing with a dream of one day being a grand orchard. There are a dozen raised beds growing produce that is distributed by local food pantries. But the real magic of this garden is that it is equally attended by all three faith expressions. It is not unusual to see Muslim, Jewish, and Christian people all working together to till, to plant, to weed, and to harvest. Working together in unity, they produce in abundance, and the fruits of their labors address food insecurity issues all over South Omaha. Another program of the Tri-Faith Initiative is a program called We Can Only Be Human Together. This program was birthed after the domestic terrorism incident in Buffalo, New York on May 14, 2022. It just was born this year, where a terrorist killed 10 black people in a supermarket, basing his vendetta on the evils of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. This conspiracy theory, advanced by white supremacists, pits white people against minorities, claiming that there is a battle for supremacy and white folks must fight and win. Well, the project of the Tri-Faith Initiative is focused on refuting that myth of replacement theory and the violence it entices, basing their work on the words of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, "My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together." Now think about those words for a minute. My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. This is a profound understanding of what peace truly is. Peace can only be achieved when people are willing to work together, when people are willing to tear down all of those things that divide us, to abolish the human-made barriers that keep us from seeing humanity in one another. If one is to investigate this terrorist, this white supremacist who orchestrated the massacre in Buffalo, killing 10 black people, or the gay-hating fearmonger who killed 5 people at the Club Q sanctuary in Colorado Springs, or the people that have killed 32 transgender people this year simply because they were being true to their identity, one would not find people who are embracing Desmond Tutu's philosophy, that we can only be human together. The perpetrators of these incidents have built walls of fear, hate, and racist bigotry that seem insurmountable. But the We Can Only Be Human Together program at the Tri-Faith Initiative seeks to tear down those walls through education and through relationship building. Through these simple tasks, they seek to define diversity and difference as assets and strengths, not as objects of fear and hate. The people at the Tri-Faith Initiative are crying out for peace. Now, I know there are those who would say that we have a better chance at realizing peace if we would just stop talking about all these things that challenge our society. If we would just stick our heads in the sand and pretend like everything is great, all would be fine. Sweep oppression under the rug. Facing it head on causes too much tension. Let's pretend that we're colorblind. Don't say gay. Let's emulate the ostrich. If we pretend something that challenges us doesn't exist, it will cease to exist. And then we've got peace, right? Well, to me, that's kind of like playing peekaboo with a little child. One of the characteristics of an infant is that infants believe that if they can't see it, it doesn't exist. When we are out of their field of vision, we no longer exist. The joy of peekaboo for a baby is our sudden materialization into existence. But as we mature from infancy, we develop an insight called object permanence. Toddlers come to realize that something does exist even when it's not directly in their line of vision. Perhaps those of us who try to deny the reality of oppression in our world and try to make peace by just not talking about it need to learn about object permanence. We need to evolve from infancy, at least to toddlerhood, and face the realities of our world. Nobody is free until everyone is free, and nobody can enjoy peace until everyone can enjoy peace. Blind denial is not only naive, but it's also harmful for those who suffer under the oppression of others. This is the example that John the Baptizer was conveying in his ministry as we read it in the gospel lesson this morning. John the Baptizer was not some serene guru sitting on a mountaintop waiting for peace to envelop him and just answering questions as people wander up. He was a wild radical. The Gospel of Mark records John as being a wild man clothed in camel's hair with a leather belt around his waist, which is a violation of the rules in Deuteronomy, by the way. He ate locusts and wild honey, another violation of the rules in Deuteronomy. He came to Jerusalem actively crying out for peace, calling on the people of Jerusalem to change up everything in their lives and make way for God. He quoted the wisdom contained in the book of Isaiah. John cried out, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. Every valley shall be filled, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked path be made straight, and the rough path be made smooth, and all flesh shall see the salvation of God." Now think of what John is saying here. To us, in our day and age, we hear him saying this, "Prepare the way of the Lord," and we see it as a great invitation for the baby to be born in our lives once more. We are rolling out the red carpet for that cute little baby to be born in the manger and in our lives. Or we think about a song written by Stephen Schwartz and we get ready to enjoy a great musical. But the prophet Isaiah was not talking about a calm and serene path to peace when he wrote this passage 800 years before John the Baptizer was even born. And John the Baptizer was not talking about a calm and serene path to peace when he quotes Isaiah as he shambles into Jerusalem with his camel hair and leather belt. Isaiah and John are both talking about mixing things up. They're talking about protesting. They're talking about creating a disturbance. John the Baptizer is a radical, a rabble-rouser, a protester, a disruptor. He's not just suggesting that peace might be a cool idea. He's crying out for peace. Tear down the mountains, make the crooked path straight, make the rough path smooth, shake up everything, tear it all up, rip the scab off and make it bleed. You can't have peace simply by pretending everything is peaceful. Wishing and hoping for peace doesn't bring peace. Crying out for peace is much more effective. So how do we embody John the Baptizer in our world today? How can we cry out for peace in our broken and hurting world? We saw in May of 2020 when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, black and white people joined together, all folks joined together in peaceful protests, and yes, there were some unfortunate incidents, but most of the protests across all 50 states and across the world were designed to cry out for peace, to raise awareness of the reality of oppression that was exemplified in that incident. We were actively crying out for peace for all God's children, black and white and brown and everyone. Yes, there were some protests that unfortunately turned into riots, another symptom of unchecked oppression. But the vast majority of these protests were peaceful and were a tangible cry to peace. And that's just one example. The cry for peace is also seen in Ukraine. The folks in Ukraine, some would argue that in order to have peace, the Ukrainians should just stop fighting, acquiesce to Russian demands. No fighting means peace, right? But the Ukrainian people would disagree. Fighting for justice in Ukraine is their way of crying out for peace. And I think they're winning their fight. Dr. Martin Luther King once said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I believe this to be true. But I would also say that that arc's not just going to bend itself. I've been around long enough to see our cultural moral arc in the U.S. bend toward a more peaceable life for black people, queer people, the Asian community, and even cisgender white people who at one time suffered under greater oppression for having diverse circumstances in their lives. We have made great strides in the past 50 years towards peace, but it took generations of people crying out for peace to get us where we are today. It was because of radicals, rabble-rousers, protesters, and disruptors just like John the Baptizer. Because they cried out for peace, we now realize a more peaceful world than the world of generations ago. Yes, we do. And now the task falls to us. Now, I'm sure those of you might question my perception of our current global context. There are those who might say our current global context is not peaceful. And you're right, it's not. We have a long way to go, but we are making progress. Believe it or not, our world is much more peaceful in 2022 than it was in 1970, 1960, 1950, 1920, or any other time in history. We have less oppression of minorities, We have less oppression of women than at any time in history. We have less war, we have less violence, and yes, we do have less crime today than we did in preceding generations. Global hunger has been cut in half since 1990. It seems like our world is less peaceful today, but that is perception, not reality. It is one of the effects of living in a 24-hour news cycle with social media and fake news in our faces all day long. The reality is, our cries for peace over the past century or so have done some good, and they've yielded in greater peace in our world. But we got a long way to go. So today we heard the words of John the Baptizer, and we realized that to truly prepare the way for Jesus, we need to cry out for peace. With our voices, with our votes, with our hands, with our feet, and with all the daily choices we make every day to interact and to prioritize things in the world. John the Baptizer set the tone for us, and it is up to us to carry it on. So cry out for peace, just like John the Baptizer. Amen. Please rise and join together in our hymn.